One of the challenges that young faculty members in particular face, I think, and particularly perhaps classical liberal ones, is how to balance teaching and research. That is, what's the role, what's the relationship between them, how do we balance them in terms of our time, where should we be spending our time, how do they relate to each other? There's a whole bunch of questions here about the relationship between teaching and research that I think are ones that young faculty members and graduate students who are going to be faculty members struggle with a bit, or struggle with thinking about. So I want to offer, again, a few ideas, a few suggestions about when we might think about these things, and maybe a few bits of advice about how to successfully combine teaching and research. So let me start with my conclusion. The underlying theme here of all the things I want to talk about is this, that teaching and research are long-run complements, but they're substitutes on the margin. What I mean by that is that at any moment in time, faculty members face a choice. Should I devote an hour to preparing for class or grading papers or whatever it might be, or should I spend that hour reading or writing or working on my research and my other professional activity? At any given point in time, on that margin, there are always substitutes. You can't do both at the same time, right? You have to make choices on a sort of day-to-day basis. True as that might be, over time, however, I really do believe that teaching and research are complements. That is, doing each of them, you can do each of them and make yourself better at the other. That is, you can use the classroom as a place to help your research, and your research will help you become a better classroom teacher. That's over the longer run. Again, at any point in time, right, it's clearly substitutes. But in the long run, teaching and research are complements. Now, so one of the elements of, how are they complements? Well, one of the elements of that argument I think is fairly obvious to people, and it's the one people usually point to, which is the way in which being a good researcher makes you a better teacher. And I think that is fairly obvious, but it bears repeating, which is if you are engaged and contributing to the scholarly conversation in your discipline, you're going to come into the classroom with more knowledge, with more enthusiasm, with generally just better able to convey and communicate ideas to your students. If you can write, and this isn't always true, but if you can write for a professional audience, you can probably convey those ideas to 18 to 22-year-olds. But more important than the conveying of the ideas, sort of in a narrow sense, is you're going to come with an enthusiasm, with a sort of spirit of inquiry. You're going to make it obvious to students that you care deeply about the things that you're talking about, and that you're involved in those conversations, and people listen to what you have to say. And all of those things, I think, will make you a better classroom teacher. Will certainly help you engage students more. So I think that stuff is sort of fairly obvious. All right. But what about the other way around? Is it possible for your teaching to improve your ability as a researcher? Where does the complementarity come the other way? I think there's a whole bunch of different ways that this can happen. Let me sort of name three or four. One, first, is that the classroom can be a place where new issues come up or new ideas come up that you've never really thought about before, that come out of, say, a conversation you have with the class, and that sort of get you thinking about things in ways that you never have before. I'll just take one example from my own career. I started off as a monetary macroeconomist and wound up teaching a course on the family with a couple of people from outside economics, and that totally changed my research orientation. I got fascinated by those questions, and I've been working on these issues now for over a decade. So one's teaching really can have a substantive impact on research, whether it's from colleagues, whether it's from students raising questions, and so on. My book on monetary and Austrian macroeconomics from a decade ago, a lot of those ideas came out of the work I was doing in the classroom, teaching money and banking. The book grew out of the lectures I was doing in the classroom, right? So there's one point. But once I started to write the book, I started to revise the ideas, bring those back into the classroom, and that in turn, the ability to convey those ideas to students helped me rewrite the book again in ways that made things more clear. So the classroom can be a place to try out new ideas, to sort of be an incubator for ideas about research that you might not think about otherwise. The other thing you can use the classroom for is an opportunity to try out new books or new articles, to sort of to force yourself to read something and talk about it that you haven't before. So asking students to read a book, either maybe one you haven't read in a long time or one that just came out that's relevant to the class, especially an upper level class, becomes a way to force yourself to read the book. And if you've got good students, and particularly in an upper level class, your conversations with them will certainly generate ideas and sort of get you thinking about those issues in ways perhaps you haven't had before. This takes a little bit of self-confidence to sort of walk into the classroom and say, we're going to read a book that I've never read before, haven't read in 20 years or whatever it might be. But that's fine. You can do